A respected judge, convinced of a young man's guilt, hands down a 60-year sentence. But when a forgotten piece of evidence surfaces, it uncovers a deep web of corruption that threatens to tear the justice system apart. The Fresno, California courtroom was stifling that day, the air thick with summer heat and the weight of a life-altering decision. All eyes were on Judge Malcolm Brewer, a man known not for compassion but for his unyielding judgments. At 62, with 35 years on the bench, his face as chiseled as his rulings, reflected a career built on finality. At the defense table, 24-year-old Ryan Hale stood, his hands subtly trembling, his gaze unyielding. He carried the quiet defiance of someone who had spent a lifetime proving themselves. Ryan had always maintained his innocence, even after his arrest for the armed robbery of a jewelry store that left a man critically injured. But today his voice was irrelevant. "Mr. Hale," Judge Brewer's deep baritone resonated through the room, "you stand convicted by a jury of your peers for crimes that have caused irreparable harm to this community. Your actions were not only reckless but calculated, and you have shown no remorse." In the back row, Ryan's mother stifled a sob. She had pleaded for the court to see beyond a case number, to remember the boy who dreamed of becoming a firefighter. But the evidence had been overwhelming. Eyewitness accounts, surveillance footage, and an anonymous tip that sealed his fate. "I hereby sentence you to 60 years in state prison," Judge Brewer declared, his gavel striking the oak block, the sound echoing with chilling finality. Ryan stood motionless, his lips pressed tight as if holding back futile words. Gasps and whispers erupted, reporters scribbling notes. For Ryan, the world fell silent. He turned for one last look at his mother before being led away, his shackled footsteps fading. Back in his chambers, Judge Brewer shut the door against the noise, pouring black coffee. He stared into the swirling liquid, searching for answers that weren't there. The day was done, and justice as he understood it had been served. Or so he thought. He couldn't know the truth he'd just buried was about to claw its way to the surface, refusing to remain hidden. The Hale robbery case had captivated local news for weeks. The crime itself was brazen. A masked gunman storming Carter's Jewelers in downtown Fresno on a busy Thursday, making off with over $150,000 in stolen goods. Store clerk Samuel Gaines lay critically injured in the crossfire. Ryan Hale, a part-time mechanic with no prior criminal record, was arrested 2 weeks later, thanks to an anonymous tip. The caller claimed Ryan matched the suspect's description. The prosecution painted a damning picture, linking him to stolen goods found in a storage unit registered in his name. Ryan's court-appointed attorney struggled against a mountain of evidence. Grainy surveillance footage showing a man with a similar build, eyewitnesses who recognized Ryan's voice, and most incriminating, fingerprints on the weapon left at the scene. Still, Ryan insisted, "I didn't do this. I wasn't anywhere near that store. I've never even touched a gun." His alibi, a double shift at the auto shop, crumbled when his boss couldn't fully verify his whereabouts. The prosecution's closing arguments were razor-sharp. "This is a man who thought he could outsmart the law," the district attorney declared, "but the evidence doesn't lie. The fingerprints don't lie. The witnesses don't lie." Ryan's defense felt frail, almost defeated. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," his lawyer pleaded, "there are holes in this case, doubts. Isn't that enough to give this young man the benefit of the doubt?" But his voice lacked conviction, and the jury remained unmoved. Deliberation was swift. Less than 3 hours. The verdict: guilty on all counts. Ryan didn't flinch, but the tightening of his jaw betrayed the storm within. Judge Brewer, ever impartial, prepared to deliver a justified sentence. He'd seen countless hardened criminals, masters of manipulation. To him, Ryan was no different. His gaze swept the courtroom, searching Ryan's face for any sign of remorse. When the sentence was handed down, the room seemed to exhale. Relief for the victims, devastation for Ryan and his mother. The system had spoken, unforgiving. But as Judge Brewer signed the sentencing papers that evening, a faint, unsettling flicker remained, a nagging sense he couldn't quite place. He dismissed it as fatigue. What Judge Brewer couldn't know was that the trial was just the beginning. The real story, hidden in plain sight, was about to change everything. It began on an unremarkable Wednesday evening. Judge Brewer sat in his study, the warm glow of a desk lamp illuminating stacks of legal briefs. Retirement had been on his mind, But tonight, a new case involving serious allegations of police misconduct demanded attention. As he thumbed through the documents, something caught his eye, an evidence log from a prior investigation. At first it was a fleeting glance, a meaningless detail. Then a name leaped out: Ryan Hale. Brewer frowned. Names resurfacing wasn't unusual, but this felt different. He flipped the page, his pulse quickening. The log detailed items from a separate robbery investigation around the same time as the Carter's Jewelers case. One item stood out: a gun. Its description matched the weapon used in Ryan's conviction. The problem? This gun hadn't been submitted as evidence during Ryan's trial. It hadn't even been mentioned. Brewer leaned forward, the weight of his discovery pressing down. He cross-referenced the serial number with the trial documents. An exact match. Same make, same scratches. But this report claimed the gun was seized during an unrelated arrest 2 days after the robbery. How is that possible? He muttered, his heart racing. If this gun was already in police custody, it couldn't have been used in the Carter's Jewelers robbery. And if it wasn't the weapon whose fingerprints were on it, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Decades navigating the legal system had taught Brewer how easily details could be buried. But this felt intentional. Determined, he requested the full case file for the unrelated robbery. It arrived the next morning, a thick folder of reports, photos, and statements. The deeper Brewer dug, the more the threads unraveled. The arresting officer in the unrelated case was the same detective who testified during Ryan's trial. And then there was the anonymous tip. He'd barely thought about it during the trial, but now it seemed glaringly suspicious. He subpoenaed the tip line records, his unease growing. When they arrived, Brewer's blood ran cold. The call hadn't come from a random citizen. It originated from a burner phone registered under the same detective's name. The walls of his office seemed to close in as the realization hit him. Ryan Hale had been set up. The evidence manipulated, the testimony orchestrated. Brewer's stomach churned as he thought of the 60-year sentence, the shattered life of a young man who might have been innocent. He had prided himself on upholding the law, but now the law felt like quicksand. He knew what had to be done, but the path forward was fraught with peril. As the weight of his discovery settled, Brewer made a choice. He would dig deeper no matter the cost. The truth demanded it. Judge Brewer hadn't slept much. Mornings began with legal documents, nights ended with scribbled notes. The more he investigated, the darker the picture became. The first crack in the wall came over coffee with retired investigator Daniel Hayes. Brewer laid out his findings. "This isn't just negligence, Malcolm," Hayes said. "If what you're saying is true, someone went to great lengths to make sure that kid took the fall." Brewer nodded grimly. "I need proof, Dan. Solid proof." Hayes agreed, and within days they were neck-deep in records. Falsified reports, missing evidence logs, and witness statements altered to fit the prosecution's narrative. One witness, a store clerk, caught Brewer's attention. He'd initially identified another man, then changed his statement to implicate Ryan. Hayes tracked him down. "I didn't want to do it," the man confessed, trembling. "But Detective Lewis, he pressured me. Said if I didn't, I'd be arrested for obstruction. I didn't have a choice." Detective Lewis. The name sent a wave of anger through Brewer. This was the same officer who submitted the false tip and concealed evidence. As they dug deeper, a pattern emerged. Lewis had a history of questionable tactics, intimidating witnesses, fabricating evidence, coercing confessions. Yet his record was spotless, protected by layers of bureaucracy. The breakthrough came when Hayes recovered deleted emails from Lewis's police account. One email, addressed to the district attorney, detailed a plan to ensure a conviction in the Carter's Jewelers case. Attached was a list of fabricated evidence and doctored witness statements. Brewer felt a surge of rage. The very system he'd devoted his life to was rotten. Yet there was no time for despair. He had the proof. But exposing the truth wouldn't be easy. Lewis had powerful allies, and going public could cost Brewer everything. His career, his reputation, even his safety. But thinking of Ryan Hale, innocent in a prison cell, the decision was clear. "We go public," Brewer told Hayes. "No matter what it takes." The next day, Brewer filed a motion to reopen Ryan's case, attaching the damning evidence against Lewis. The courthouse was shocked. Brewer also filed a formal complaint with the Department of Justice, calling for an independent investigation into Lewis and the Fresno Police Department. The backlash was swift. Anonymous threats warned him off. Colleagues distanced themselves. Media questioned his motives. But Brewer stood firm. The truth was out and there was no turning back. As the storm grew, Brewer knew the fight was far from over. The hardest battles were yet to come. The fallout from Judge Brewer's motion was immediate and explosive. Local headlines screamed accusations of police corruption, and public outrage spread like wildfire. For the first time, Brewer felt the heat of scrutiny. Some called him a hero, others a traitor. But it wasn't just public opinion. He received odd phone calls, heavy silence on the line. One morning his car tires were slashed, a crude note on the windshield, "Drop it or else." Brewer knew the risks but hadn't expected threats to escalate so quickly. Still, he refused to be intimidated. Too many lives had been ruined by systemic failures. Ryan Hale's determined, heartbreakingly resigned face haunted his thoughts. Meanwhile, Detective Lewis wasn't going down quietly. Through his attorney, Lewis denied everything. "This is nothing more than a vendetta," Lewis declared in a televised interview, his polished demeanor contrasting sharply with the mounting evidence. Brewer watched, jaw tightening. Lewis lied boldly, but Brewer had something Lewis didn't: the truth. As the investigation progressed, Hayes unearthed a critical piece of evidence: security camera footage from a parking lot near the jewelry store, recorded on the day of the robbery. The footage, never submitted during the trial, showed a man matching Lewis's physical description leaving the scene with a duffel bag. Brewer's heart pounded. It wasn't just exculpatory, it was damning. With this, the pieces clicked into place. The robbery wasn't random. Lewis himself orchestrated it. The next step was clear yet dangerous. Brewer called for an emergency hearing to present the new evidence. The courtroom was tense as the footage played. Gasps rippled through the packed gallery. "This man," Brewer said, gesturing to the screen, "is the same detective who led the investigation against Ryan Hale. He manipulated the evidence, coerced witnesses, and framed an innocent man to cover his own tracks." The reaction was immediate. Reporters scrambled, flashes illuminating the room. Lewis, in the gallery with his lawyer, looked pale but defiant. "You're making a mistake, Brewer," he hissed as he was escorted out in handcuffs. "You don't know what you've started." The confrontation left Brewer shaken but resolute. The case was now in a higher court's hands, Ryan Hale's conviction under re-examination. But Brewer knew this wasn't the end. It was merely the beginning of a much larger battle. As the courtroom emptied, Brewer realized the full weight of his discovery. The truth was out, but the fight for justice was far from over. Weeks later, Judge Brewer sat in the same courtroom where Ryan Hale had been sentenced. But this time the air felt different. The gallery was packed. Reporters, activists, Ryan's family, all awaiting the retrial judge's decision. Ryan, thinner, visibly aged from prison, sat quietly at the defense table, his posture steady, his gaze unwavering despite the ordeal. A lump formed in Brewer's throat as he watched the young man who had endured so much for a crime he didn't commit. The evidence Brewer and Hayes unearthed was irrefutable. Surveillance footage, falsified reports, coerced testimonies, all pointed to a web of corruption that framed Ryan and shielded the real criminals. As the presiding judge announced the decision to overturn Ryan's conviction, the room erupted in applause and tears. Ryan stood, trembling, as his mother rushed to embrace him. For a moment, time seemed to stop. Brewer, seated quietly in the back, allowed himself a rare smile. Justice had finally been served. But the journey had come at a cost. In the days that followed, the fallout spread far and wide. Detective Lewis faced criminal charges. An independent investigation into the Fresno Police Department revealed a culture of corruption that had gone unchecked for years. The case sparked nationwide calls for reform, Brewer's role becoming a rallying cry for accountability within the justice system. Despite the accolades, Brewer remained introspective. This victory was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. The system he once trusted was flawed but not beyond repair. He was determined to spend the rest of his career fighting to make it better. As for Ryan, his journey was just beginning. Freed from the burden of wrongful conviction, he vowed to dedicate his life to helping others unjustly imprisoned. His story became a beacon of hope for those who believed in resilience and the pursuit of truth. The story of Ryan Hale and Judge Brewer is a powerful reminder that justice isn't infallible. It requires vigilance, courage, and a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. If this story moved you, consider supporting organizations that work to free the wrongfully convicted and advocate for systemic reform. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire and challenge the way we see the world. Because sometimes the fight for justice doesn't end in the courtroom, it begins there.